Imagine this: you're scrolling through Instagram and every other post is telling you, prioritize self-care, pamper yourself, or you deserve to live your best life. It's everywhere, right? And you think, I'm doing everything these influencers and experts say I should do. So why do I feel more stressed, more disconnected, and more overwhelmed than ever? Today I'm going to tell you something that might shock you. Some of the self-care practices you've been religiously following might actually be hurting your mental health, not helping. But don't worry, I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to dig deep into the psychology behind why these trends are getting it wrong, how they're backfiring, and what you can do to take back control of your mental health. By the end of this video, you'll not only recognize these toxic self-care traps, but you'll also have the tools to build a more authentic, sustainable approach to your well-being. Let's start. Here's the thing about self-care. On the surface, it sounds amazing. Taking time for yourself, treating yourself, doing what you love, it's all about you. But the first trend we need to discuss is how self-care has become a form of escapism. You know what I'm talking about: the bubble baths, the spa days, the scented candles. And look, I'm not saying those things are bad. Who doesn't love a good bath? But the problem is that these treat-yourself moments are often just band-aids. They don't address the underlying issues that are causing your stress or anxiety in the first place. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. Think about it: when you're overwhelmed, what do? You might say, I'll take a day off and binge watch my favorite show, or I'll buy something nice for myself because I deserve it. But studies in psychology, like the one conducted by Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia, show that when we distract ourselves from our problems instead of confronting them, it actually increases our levels of emotional distress in the long run. Wilson's research demonstrated that people who were asked to sit alone with their thoughts, without any distractions, experienced initial discomfort, but over time, they reported greater clarity and emotional regulation. In contrast, those who constantly sought distractions felt more stressed once the distractions ended. This makes sense, right? If we're constantly running away from discomfort with temporary pleasures, we never really learn how to cope with it. So the next time you're tempted to drown your stress in a glass of wine or a shopping spree, ask yourself, am I actually solving the problem, or am I just avoiding it? The truth is, real self-care isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's about sitting with your discomfort, understanding it, and figuring out how to address it head-on. Let's move on to the second trend: toxic positivity disguised as self-care. You've seen the Instagram captions, good vibes, only smile through the pain, or everything happens for a reason. On the surface, these messages seem encouraging. They tell you to stay positive, to focus on the bright side of life. But here's the problem: when you force yourself to stay positive all the time, you're actually suppressing your real emotions. And that suppression can lead to something psychologists call emotional dissonance. Emotional dissonance happens when there's a gap between how you feel and how you think you're supposed to feel. For example, let's say you're going through a breakup. Deep down, you feel sad, angry, maybe even resentful. But because you've been told to stay positive, you push those feelings aside and pretend everything is fine. The issue: research from the University of Texas shows that suppressing negative emotions doesn't make them go away, it makes them stronger. In fact, people who suppress their emotions are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems like high blood pressure. So how do we fix this? The answer is emotional acceptance. Instead of forcing yourself to feel positive all the time, give yourself permission to feel whatever you're feeling. If you're sad, let yourself cry. If you're angry, find a healthy way to express that anger. Journaling, talking to a friend, or even just sitting with your emotions can be incredibly healing. Remember, self-care isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about being honest with yourself and giving yourself the space to feel. Now, let's talk about the third trend: overscheduling your self-care. This one might surprise you because it seems counterintuitive. After all, isn't self-care supposed to be about relaxation? But here's what happens: you see influencers posting their morning routines: yoga at 6 a.m., green smoothies at 7, meditation at 8, and you think, I need to do all of that too. So you fill your schedule with self-care activities, but instead of feeling relaxed, you feel even more stressed. Why does this happen? It's because your brain perceives overscheduling as a form of pressure. According to research by Dr. Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, when we fill our time with too many activities, whether they're work-related or self-care related, we enter a state of time scarcity. This means we feel like there's never enough time to get everything done, which triggers feelings of stress and overwhelm. And when you're stressed, your body releases cortisol, a hormone that, over time, can lead to burnout. The solution? Simplify your self-care routine. Instead of trying to do everything, focus on 1 or 2 activities that genuinely make you feel good. Maybe it's taking a walk in nature, reading a book, or spending time with loved ones. The key is to prioritize quality over quantity. Remember, self-care isn't about checking items off a to-do list. It's about creating space for yourself to recharge. So far, we've talked about 3 trends: escapism, toxic positivity, and overscheduling. Do you see how these seemingly harmless practices can actually backfire? It's kind of scary, right? But here's the good news: awareness is the first step to change. By recognizing these patterns, you're already one step closer to breaking free from them. The 4th self-care trend that's quietly sabotaging your mental health is the obsession with productivity-based self-care. You know what I'm talking about, the idea that every single self-care activity has to serve a purpose. It's when you turn your hobbies into side hustles, your workouts into body transformation goals, or your relaxation time into an elaborate routine that somehow still revolves around improving yourself. This trend is closely tied to what psychologists call the toxic hustle culture, where even your downtime isn't really downtime, it's just another opportunity for optimization. Let me ask you this: when was the last time you did something purely for the joy of it? Not because it would help you stay on track, get ahead, or become the best version of yourself, but just because you wanted to. If you're finding it hard to answer, you're not alone. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that every minute of our lives should be productive. But here's the problem: when we attach a sense of achievement to every activity, we lose the ability to truly relax. And over time, this can lead to something called self-worth contingency. Self-worth contingency is a psychological concept that refers to tying your sense of value as a person to your achievements. Dr. Jennifer Crocker, a psychologist at Ohio State University, has done extensive research on this topic. She found that when people base their self-worth on external factors like how productive they are or how much they achieve, they're more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Why? Because their sense of self becomes fragile. If they're not constantly achieving, they feel like they're failing. So how do we break free from this cycle? The answer lies in play. Yes, play. Engaging in activities that have no purpose other than to bring you joy. This could be dancing in your living room, doodling on a piece of paper, or even just lying on the grass and staring at the clouds. Play is something we naturally did as kids, but as adults we've forgotten how important it is for our mental health. Research by Dr. Stuart Brown, founder of the National Institute for Play, shows that play reduces stress, boosts creativity, and enhances emotional resilience. So the next time you're planning a self-care day, ask yourself, am I doing this because it makes me happy or because it feels productive? Now, let's talk about one of the biggest barriers to authentic self-care: guilt. How many times have you felt guilty for taking time for yourself? Maybe you've thought, I should be working instead, or I don't have time for this. This guilt doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of a culture that glorifies busyness and equates rest with laziness. But here's the thing: rest is not a luxury. It's a biological necessity. When you deny yourself rest, you're not just hurting your mental health, you're also putting your physical health at risk. There's a fascinating study by Dr. Matthew Walker, a leading sleep scientist, that highlights the consequences of sleep deprivation. His research shows that even one night of poor sleep can impair your ability to regulate emotions, solve problems, and make decisions. Over time, chronic sleep deprivation can lead to serious mental health issues, including anxiety and depression. So the next time you feel guilty about resting, remind yourself rest isn't selfish, it's essential. This ties into a psychological concept called the looking glass self, which was first introduced by sociologist Charles Cooley. The looking glass self is the idea that we shape our sense of self based on how we think others perceive us. For example, if you post a picture of your self-care routine on Instagram and it gets a lot of likes, you might feel validated. You might even think, wow, I must be doing self-care right. But here's the catch: when your self-worth is dependent on external validation, it becomes unstable. Because what happens when those likes stop coming in, or when someone criticizes your choices? Suddenly, the thing that was supposed to make you feel good becomes a source of stress and insecurity. One of the most striking experiments that illustrates this was conducted by Dr. Jean Twenge, a psychologist who studies the impact of social media on mental health. Her research found that people who spend more time curating their online personas are more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression. Why? Because they're constantly comparing themselves to others and seeking approval from an audience that might not even care. So what's the solution? It's simple: bring the focus back to yourself. The next time you're about to engage in a self-care activity, ask yourself, am I doing this for me or for someone else's approval? If the answer is the latter, pause and rethink your choice. True self-care isn't about how it looks to the outside world. It's about how it makes you feel on the inside. Now that we've gone through all 5 trends: escapism, toxic positivity, overscheduling, productivity-based self-care, and external validation, let's take a moment to reflect. Do any of these resonate with you? If so, don't beat yourself up. These trends are so pervasive that it's almost impossible not to fall into their traps. But the fact that you're here, watching this video, means you're already taking the first step toward breaking free from them. Before we wrap up this part, let me leave you with a question: what does self-care mean to you? Not what society says it should mean, not what influencers tell you it should look like, but what it actually means to you. Because at the end of the day, self-care isn't one size fits all. It's deeply personal, and the more you connect with what truly nourishes your mind, body, and soul, the less likely you are to fall for these toxic trends. Now that we've identified the 5 self-care trends that might be ruining your mental health: escapism, toxic positivity, overscheduling, productivity-based self-care, and external validation, let's dig even deeper. We need to look at why these trends have become so pervasive and what that says about the larger cultural forces at play. Because the truth is, these aren't just isolated mistakes we're making as individuals. They're symptoms of a society that has commodified self-care and turned it into a product rather than an authentic, personal practice. Think about it, the modern self-care movement didn't just happen by accident. It's part of a broader consumer culture that profits off your insecurities. If you're feeling burned out, there's a product for that. If you're feeling anxious, there's a subscription box for that. If you're feeling unmotivated, there's a whole routine you can buy into. And the messaging is always the same: you're not good enough as you are. You need this to fix yourself. But here's the irony: this constant pursuit of fixing yourself often leaves you feeling even worse. Why? Because it reinforces the belief that you're broken in the first place. Let's look at the psychology behind this. There's a concept in behavioral economics called the hedonic treadmill. It refers to the idea that no matter how much we achieve or acquire, our baseline level of happiness eventually returns to where it started. So when you buy that new skincare product or take that luxury vacation in the name of self-care, it might make you feel good for a moment, but over time, that feeling fades and you're left chasing the next thing. This cycle keeps you in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, which is exactly what companies want because dissatisfaction drives consumption. This is where mindfulness comes in. And I don't mean the trendy, Instagram-ready version of mindfulness. I mean the original, unpolished practice of being present with yourself exactly as you are, without judgment. Research by Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction (MBSR), has shown that mindfulness can significantly reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. And unlike the self-care trends we've been talking about, mindfulness doesn't require you to buy anything. It's about simplifying, not adding more to your plate. Here's a quick exercise you can try right now. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, what do I need at this moment? Not what society says you need, not what your favorite influencer says you need. What you need. Maybe it's rest, maybe it's a connection, maybe it's just a moment of silence. Whatever it is, honor that, because true self-care starts with listening to yourself. Now let's move on to the fifth and final trend, relying too heavily on external validation for your self-care choices. This one is tricky because it often doesn't feel like a problem until it's too late. Think about it. How often do you choose a self-care activity because it looks good on social media? Maybe it's a perfectly curated yoga session, a fancy smoothie bowl, or a luxurious spa day. And again, there's nothing wrong with these things in and of themselves. But when you start prioritizing how your self-care looks over how it feels, that's when it becomes a problem. But let's take this one step further. Rest isn't just about sleep or relaxation, it's also about creating boundaries. And this is where many of us struggle. We say yes to things we don't have the capacity for. We overextend ourselves because we don't want to disappoint others. But every time you say yes to something you don't truly want to do, you're saying no to yourself. And that's not self-care. Setting boundaries is hard, especially if you're a people pleaser or if you've been raised to prioritize others over yourself. But boundaries are one of the most powerful forms of self-care you can practice. Psychologist Dr. Brené Brown talks about this extensively in her work on vulnerability and courage. She says that the most compassionate people are also the most boundaries. Why? Because they understand that you can't pour from an empty cup. By saying no when you need to, you're actually protecting your capacity to show up fully for the things and people that matter most. If you're struggling to set boundaries, here's a tip: start small. The next time someone asks you to do something, pause before responding. Ask yourself, do I have the time and energy for this? Does this align with my values? If the answer is no, practice saying, I'd love to help, but I can't right now. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but over time it gets easier. And the more you practice, the more you'll realize that setting boundaries isn't about being selfish, it's about being honest. As we near the end of this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. Self-care isn't about checking off a list of trendy activities. It's about developing a relationship with yourself. It's about learning to trust yourself, to listen to yourself, and to honor your needs, even when those needs don't look like what everyone else is doing. Because at the end of the day, no one knows what you need better than you do. So let's recap. We've talked about 5 self-care trends that might be ruining your mental health: escapism, toxic positivity, overscheduling, productivity-based self-care, and external validation. We've explored the psychological traps behind these trends and how they can backfire. And most importantly, we've discussed practical steps you can take to reclaim self-care as a personal, meaningful practice. Now, it's your turn. I want you to think about one small change you can make today to prioritize your mental health in a way that feels authentic to you. Maybe it's simplifying your routine. Maybe it's setting a boundary. Maybe it's letting yourself feel your emotions without judgment. Whatever it is, commit to it. Because you deserve to care for yourself, not in a way that looks good on the outside, but in a way that truly nourishes you on the inside. And as you move forward, remember, self-care isn't about perfection. It's a journey. There will be days when it feels easy, and there will be days when it feels hard. But as long as you're showing up for yourself, even in the smallest of ways, you're already making progress. So take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and know that you're doing the best you can. And that's enough. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I know we've covered a lot today, but I hope it's given you some clarity, some inspiration, and most importantly, some permission to care for yourself in a way that feels right for you. Because at the end of the day, that's what self-care is all about.